Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of WSL Pure One Ocean, where we speak with all the champions out there working to protect our ocean. I'm Reese, I'm your host, and I'm excited to bring you another episode for our series on Plastic Free July. We started the series in conversation with the founder of the movement, Rebecca Prince-Ruiz, and talked about how you can go plastic free on your own terms in your individual daily life. We then talked to Duray Shin about how to level up your plastic activism. And if you haven't listened to those two episodes, I highly recommend you do. You don't need to understand today's episode, but they're good episodes. Today, we're going to reinforce the importance of this work and better understand the true environmental and human impact of plastic and the importance of inclusion and community building to get to just solutions. So today, I'm really excited to speak with our friend Stiv Wilson. Stiv has a long career in environmental activism, specifically on the issue of plastics. He has sailed 35,000 miles studying the issue. He is a leader in the Break Free from Plastic movement. He's won awards. He's worked with some of the best nonprofit partners out there, including Five Gyres Institute. He's a real leader in this space, and he recently launched a film, The Story of Plastic, which you may have seen screened with some of our partners. And he also has launched his own nonprofit called Peak Plastic Foundation. He's a legend in the space, so we're excited to talk about all this and more. Before we get into the discussion, though, be sure to stick around at the very end. We have a great creative tip for how you can go plastic free this July from our friend Angela Sun. Okay, let's get into the episode with Stiv Wilson. Stiv, great to have you on the show. Thanks for giving us a little bit of time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be here.
Yeah, good to reconnect. I don't ever like to give someone's intro. I don't want to identify. I want to hear how others identify. You have a long, storied career in fighting plastic pollution and protecting the planet. But could you kind of maybe give us the quick summary of who you are, what your story is, real quick?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of interesting too because it's kind of come full circle. I started, working on plastic from becoming a surfer pretty late in life at 30. I finally lived on a coast, and on the coast of Oregon, when you surf there, it's a really remote place. So you can often find places to surf that you can't see a human-made object. And I noticed all this plastic on a beach. And at the time I was a journalist, kind of got mad about it, realized this is incongruent to the natural order. I wouldn't really call myself an environmentalist there, but it was more like I studied aesthetic philosophy. So I just thought it was ugly and against against what nature is. And a friend of mine said, you should talk to this group called the Surfrider Foundation and get involved. And so I went to a meeting, and then I became a chapter chair within 6 months. And then I started talking to the mayor's office, who their sustainability coordinator was at the time, is now my co-director at Peak Plastic and one of the producers on the film, this woman named Megan Ponder. And so we set out with Surfrider to ban the bag in Portland, Oregon. And I just kind of got addicted to activism. And at that time, a lot of people were talking about the gyres, and I met Anna Cummins, Marcus Erickson in that journey, and helped them get Five Gyres off the ground, Five Gyres Institute, and got to sail 35,000 nautical miles around the world doing the first ever global estimate. And, on that journey, the number one question for me was where's this stuff coming from? And I started, I just have a curious mind. I have a journalist mind. And that led me to the Philippines to see, incredibly plastic impacted community. And there was this moment in a landfill called Smoky Mountain. It's called Smoky Mountain because, families live in it, and you have organic matter deep underground decomposing, and because of pressure, it ignites. So it literally smokes, and people mine this for things that they can sell. And it was that moment, when you say we throw away stuff, I realized this was a way. And that was the moment where I recognized plastic wasn't just an ocean issue, or a downstream issue. It was a human rights issue. And I was standing here in a way, and I resolved to make this film, The Story of Plastic, because I really wanted to know where this came from and where it goes. Sort of if you take your recycling bin and you just look at it, there's a whole story before it gets there and after it leaves that bin.
Yeah.
And so that's essentially what this movie is. And,
Hang on, you went straight from bio into the movie.
Exactly.
You're doing my job for me.
Well, that's sort of how it, came together. And I think, I was a skater kid, a snowboarder kid, later a surfer kid. And, you're sort of taught these sort of anti-establishment, ways of being. And I really liked that sort of culture. And so it's not weird that I became an activist. I've always had sort of a problem with authority. Never worn a suit. So I was like, this will work for me. I'm going to try to change the world, in the way that I can as a person.
Well, I think that was a great bio and background on your career to date. I remember first kind of like hearing of you through Anna and Marcus and being like, you've got to talk to Stiv, and he really is digging in. And I started reading some of your like essays online because you were really good at just articulating full points about what's going on, right? Not just accepting these sort of very simple takes on the story, but going deeper. And then, I think one moment that I wanted to highlight, because this just like punched me in the gut when we were at the 2018 Our Ocean conference. Do you remember? And we went to that sort of like, there was a sort of consulting group doing a whole discussion at the end of the thing. We're all sitting out there and you have leaders in the plastic movement from, Froy. I think Vaughn was there. I'm not sure. I know Anna was there. Davey from Borreo, I think, was there. Doshi from Algalita, you were there. And at one point you just said, if you want to stop single-use plastic pollution, you ban fracking in the United States. And I remember just being like, whoa, that's next level. It was, for me, like, and I had sailed with Five Gyres and I kind of knew the extent of the problem, but I just thought you were looking at it with this whole different lens. And I mean, I guess that brings us to the film. So the film Story of Plastic, which is out now, people can go find it and watch it on Amazon and
it's on iTunes as well. And then if you have Discovery Go, which is like their streaming service, you can find it there too.
It showed with Discovery for Earth Day or whatever, but whatever. We'll link to wherever people can find it in the show notes, and we really encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to watch it. But Stiv, sum up, what is the story of plastic? What is this film about? I'll pull up the website for people watching, but kind of give us the story behind this film and how it came together.
Yeah, I got into it. I sort of was understanding plastic from a downstream waste issue, and I think one of the problems with that is if you are responsible with your waste and you throw things in your recycling bin, you tend to think you're not the problem. But by the time that plastic has gotten to you, it's literally already killed people. It's already pollution. And the overall health impacts from plastic are borne disproportionately by people upstream, around refineries, around fracking wells. I mean, that's where it is like smoking gun next level.
I want to make sure we hit that point. Sorry to interrupt, and I'll probably do this a bunch because you're so deep in this that you know it so well.
Yeah.
So you're saying the majority of the human impacts of plastic, or at least from what we understand, it's at the point of extraction. It's the refineries, it's the wells, it's the air pollution that's happening in communities of color that are, unfortunately often positioned next to these things, right? I mean, like, I really want people to understand that we can't just think about it as plastic coming off the shelf and going into recycling and then probably into the ocean. It's more so like, hey, let's go back to where this came from, the connection to fossil fuels.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the largest infrastructure being built right now in the United States from fracking and refining is for single-use plastic, mainly packaging, about 40-50% at this point. So this massive infrastructure is being built, and all of those sites are situated purposely in non-resilient communities. And when I say non-resilient, I'm talking about communities that we have historically, as the United States, kept down. And those are people of color. And this is by design. It's not happenstance. It's if you want to pollute somewhere, you're never going to be able to do it in a wealthy community, a wealthy white community. So you have to cite these things at places where people do not have the money or the tools to fight back, and you have to continually disenfranchise them so they cannot fight back. And if you look at the demographics, like, you know, we're in an era of like Black Lives Matter where finally we've hit a fever pitch and we're having a reckoning as a country around the racial injustice that not only has perpetuated, but is by design, you know, starting with sort of like, you know, slavery through the Southern strategy and Nixon. Like, we have designed a slave labor force and places and communities by keeping them down that we can pollute and cite these things. So when you're living, you know, in the Houston Ship Channel, was the second largest petrochemical complex in the nation, and you're not monitoring the air, or you're telling people you're monitoring the air, but you're not actually doing it, and you're delisting toxins, you know, the like lifespan of people, the cancer rates, the asthma rates, the birth problems, like that's the story of plastic. It's not whether you're eating sushi that a fish, you know, from a fish that's eaten plastic. Like that's like, you know, that may be doing some harm, but what you're breathing and what you're drinking around where plastic is made. So when we get into the story of plastic, we're trying to say, I think the meta thing is this is based on racial injustice. It's based on colonialism. And what we really want the viewer to understand is, like, when you're reaching for that bottle off the shelf, you have to understand by the time it got to you that it had to cause massive suffering to real people's lives in order for you to get that level of convenience. And then the problem continues at disposal. And so, you know, that's essentially what the story of plastic does. It tells the entire system story from the perspective of the oppressed and also the leaders around the world who are rising up to take it down, that complex.
You segued perfectly into my next kind of point on the film. You know, when you sent me an early screener of it, I was so impressed with the characters in it, not characters, the leaders, right? I mean, you have Froy and the team in the Philippines. You have Yvette in Texas. I mean, you have people who are underrepresented typically, particularly in the ocean conservation space or in the environmental space, where it's often sort of like, you know, guys like you and me, like, hey, heroes, we're out here like talking about plastic pollution. It's like, hang on, let's actually tell the story through the perspective of the communities that are affected most. And I thought that was one of the best qualities of the film. I mean, you really highlight the global South and the communities affected. I mean, you mentioned, you know, injustice being by design previously, and it seems like you're trying to write that injustice by design by making sure that we tell the stories with those communities forward.
Yeah, you know, and for me, it's not just a matter of equity, and our whole film team. And, you know, I'm really grateful to my producer, Megan Ponder, and my director, Dea Schlossberg, because, you know, it's not just a matter of equity. Like, you know, there were parts like we wanted to showcase more women scientists than male scientists in the film. So there are little undercurrents of equity throughout the whole thing. But at the same time, I think one of the, you know, issues is from a strategy standpoint. If we actually want to win this war on plastic, we need a lot more stakeholders at the table. And, you know, because like privileged white people on the coast are not a big enough or powerful enough constituency to actually change the world. So at every part of the supply chain, you have to find those leaders and you have to amplify them and you have to get resources to them. And, you know, our hope was that by amplifying these voices, they would become more resourced and build power throughout the entire system to intervene and take it down.
I think it's a really solid strategy, right? I mean, those community wins happen when we're looking out for each other. We're stronger together across the board, and we can't just show up and all of a sudden last minute say, hey, will you support my thing? Community that I didn't care about until now. I think that you can be useful. We need to be in this together and supporting one another all the way along. So I think that equity and that angle on the storytelling was really important, and it was really clear in the film. I thought it nailed it. A lot of that I want to quickly touch on Break Free from Plastic, because a lot of that community comes from the Break Free from Plastic collective movement. Just incredible community of people and stakeholders and leaders around the world, from Priggy and Tiza and all these people who are doing this work. Do you want to quickly kind of mention Break Free from Plastic, and maybe we'll even touch on the Break Free from Plastic Act before we get into peak plastic?
Yeah, sure. So Break Free from Plastic came around about 4 or 5 years ago when a funder from Europe they were wanting to get into the plastic space, and they were assessing the entire landscape. And unfortunately for, I think, a lot of people to hear, is they were least interested in the downstream product by product banned groups, and they were most interested in the grassroots zero waste organizers around the planet, which totally flipped the power dynamic in the response to plastic pollution. And it was incredibly uncomfortable for a lot of white people, to be honest.
Slow that down for a second. So you're saying these funders were saying, hey, we don't care so much about these maybe fancier activists who want to go upstream, or wait, did you say upstream or downstream? They wanted more of the ground. They didn't want to go downstream. They were saying, let's go upstream, but go with the grassroots. So the local sort of community organizers.
Yeah, absolutely. And those, people were not, organizing around whales and dolphins. And, that was not their message or their narrative. But so they weren't in the plastic pollution space in the way we understood it at the time. And in order to start a movement, you need to have representation from around the world. So I was one of 10 original steering committee members for Break Free from Plastic. And we built a strategic framework and took it to Tagaytay, Philippines. And at that point, developed with about 60 odd NGOs, the first Tagaytay strategy, which is what the strategy of Break Free from Plastic is.
What is Tagaytay?
Tagaytay. It's a town in the Philippines.
Okay, that's the name of the town. Okay.
Yeah. And so we then realized, if you don't have a funding mechanism for a strategy, it's not going to go anywhere. So in parallel, we were working with funders to create the Plastic Solutions Fund, but, really keep it church and state, keep it separated. But, there were 10 of us who were architects of all of this. And ultimately, we developed a strategy. We invited people to co-create the strategy with us, not just say, are you in or are you out? And that has grown to now over 2,000 organizations and Break Free from Plastic, who are all working from a common strategic framework. And it's enumerated sort of in the Break Free from Plastic collateral on the website, and you can read the strategy there. But what it was doing is trying to marry the global south and the global north, the upstream and the downstream, the privileged and the under-resourced, and really see if we can get on the same page and take a whole systemic intervention. And why that was so crucial at the time is climate campaigners 5 years ago had already gotten to the point that said, keep it in the ground. You can't manage that. You can't burn fossil fuels in such a way that the climate is not going to change. And so they were we have to stop fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So they hedged, the fossil fuel companies hedged in plastic because those activists were far less organized than climate campaigners. And so this is how they hedged their bet. And so
hang on, explain that just so people
Sure.
really get it. You know what I mean? Because I know what you're talking about, but I want to make sure our listeners understand. You're saying the plastic industry hedged the bet saying, okay, we're going to lose this maybe fuel and gasoline income stream in the long run to electric vehicles. Let's assume that. And then where can we shift our oil? Where can we put it into products to create a new income stream or grow an income stream? Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Like, the thing to think about is oil companies are plastic companies, petrochemical companies are oil companies, are plastic companies. They're like Hydra. They're all the same head of or they're all different heads of the same beast. And so
I have a new mental image for fossil fuel companies now. The Hydra.
Absolutely. And they don't care where these chemicals. All they want is a market for that stuff coming out of the ground. They don't care if it's fertilizers. They don't care if it's plastic. They don't care if it's chemicals for chemical recycling of plastic. They just want to make sure there is a demand for it. So to your point, and my point exactly, is we're using less oil for and for fuels and for heating, and and also just energy production with sort of solar, wind, and electric vehicles coming online. So the long-term forecast is down for that kind of refining and that kind of capacity. So the way to hedge the bet is to inundate the world with single-use plastic and packaging solutions so they can keep the growth going, but just in a different product stream. So yeah, I think it's really important for your listeners to understand that, like, if it's made from oil, it hurts the earth, and it doesn't matter what that oil becomes, whether it's going into your car to drive you forward or going into your potato chip bag. They don't care. But we do.
So I mean, that's heavy and that's very real. How do we avoid that just feeling like complete crushing, overwhelming sort of stay in your house and don't go anywhere and don't buy anything and don't eat anything? And, like, you obviously exist in a system here, how do you avoid that being the feeling that comes out of that? It maybe in your personal, I mean, clearly you're putting yourself to work and trying to battle it. Maybe that's your way of dealing with it. But what would you say to the person listening right now who is going, oh my God, like, what do we do? Because that sounds like.
Yeah, I think, the first thing to stop doing is blaming yourself, because you live in a system. You don't have a choice. We all work hard. Some of us are raising children, and we don't have a lot of time in the day. And when we go to the grocery store, it cannot be required for us to have a PhD in chemistry, ecotoxicology, and sustainability to just go home and cook something. So first of all, recognize that you're in the system. The next thing to do is quit thinking you can solve it by yourself. Like, it is great to take a reusable bag and a reusable bottle, but real change of a system happens when there's collective action. And so, I think it's a really inspiring time in the United States, because we, for a long time, culturally promote the individual, not the collective. Asian countries are very different in that philosophy. It's the many before the one, not the one before the many. And, we are in a culture of Instagram influencers and eco heroes and da-da-da-da. So, like, the way when we see a movie like the one I made, you look at it and say, I need to do something. And I'm like, first thing is you say, we need to do something. That's the first step. And that will actually, once you get involved, it's sort of like improves your quality of life. We've been trying to entertain ourselves and buy new things and, be a part or get the little dopamine from clicks of likes on Instagram and Facebook. And, these are the master's tools, and the master's house will not be undone with the master's tools. So first of all, it's time to really talk as a community of what you want that community to look like. And there are massive entrepreneurial opportunities for redesigning systems. And so I see it as an opportunity and less as just a bury your head in the sand or cry yourself to sleep. Because what we're doing is calling out a bad system that we all live in. And now it's up to us to redesign that system with empathy, creativity, and justice.
I I love that. I think sometimes knowing this information can be overwhelming. Like we said, if you're hearing this for the first time, or maybe you're hearing it for the 100th time, it can always feel like, oh my goodness, what do we do? But it's just information. It's just the truth. And once you have that, you can then figure out how you react to that and reframe your mind and say, this is what I'm going to go do. This is what I can take control of in my daily life. And then what can we do together? And I love that MO that you're bringing together. I think it's worthwhile to hit on the Federal Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, and then we can get into peak plastic. Do you want to kind of give a quick descriptor on the act that's currently proposed in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting to finally have a bill where we are talking about upstream and downstream issues. We're putting moratoriums on infrastructure build out. We're also regulating at the product level. So you now have an intersection in a movement because the bill speaks to people living at different parts of the system. And what I mean by that is if you live in a frontline community next to a refinery, or you live on the coast where you're seeing plastic on the beach, there's something in that bill for you. And so we can work together now intersectionally to build power to pass an act like this. I think, a lot of us who are working on this want to see this done at the state level, because we have a bit of gridlock at the federal. But, finally, we have environmental justice organizers and sort of like Patagonia wearing plastic pollution activists who live on the coast. They're at the same meeting, and they're working together. And that is a huge step in the right direction, because that's what industry fears, is all of us talking to each other and strategizing together, because they've been playing whack-a-mole for a long time. It's like, stamp it out here, and this is how we stamp them out. But when you have, a diverse coalition of people, it's really hard for them to frame and manipulate the issue. If we're just working at one part of the system, it's much easier for them to do that.
Yeah, that's a really well put. When you have that broad base of support across a number of different constituencies, regions, geographies, it's harder to defend against.
The one thing I do want to say is it's a start. Like it's groundbreaking in its scope. There are other things we need to deal with. It doesn't deal with toxics very well yet. So there's more work to be done, but at least we have a bill that speaks to a framework of stakeholders that together can work together to pass it. And so it's a quantum leap, but it isn't the speed of light yet.
Yeah. So speaking of other things people can do and taking action, you have now started a new organization called Peak Plastic Foundation. And I thought you could share a little bit about Peak Plastic and what you're aiming to do, some of your early work beyond Story of Plastic.
Yeah, sure. So, Megan Ponder is producer on Story of Plastics, I mentioned before, is my partner at Peak Plastic Foundation. And one of the things we noticed when we were making that movie is we kept inviting folks to come with us to sort of get the lived experience of being in these places, that are inundated. And what we also recognized is activists there really benefited from their stories getting out to the broader world, or the global north world. And every person we took along, it literally changed their lives. Like, we took Kate Nelson, Plastic Free Mermaid. We took Michael Doshi from Algalita, and Emma Priestland is corporate person for Break Free from Plastic. And it utterly changed their perspective on the issue and utterly changed their lives. And they started messaging and changing their organizations and changing how they approach the topic. And that started scaring the heck out of industry. So our aim at Peak Plastic is to keep creating those opportunities of doing that intersectional storytelling, where we bring coalitions of people together to create media and blow up and amplify the issue, but do it asymmetrically over many different kinds of channels. And so, in the time of COVID right now, we all recognized we're at a serious crossroads for humanity on the planet. And we've been producing, really trying to figure out if you can make compelling films remotely and by crowdsourcing footage and, doing exactly what you and I are doing is like being on Zoom and recording a podcast, see if we can make films this way. And, we recognize that we need to like step back from being worried about bag bans being, overturned and really look at the whole system and create a just recovery from COVID-19, because we're never going to get this opportunity where the impossible becomes possible again in our lifetimes. So we've been, again, telling stories from around the world of people working together to recover justly from this pandemic. And that is going to bleed into broader work where we're really going to investigate the nexus of plastic pollution and racial justice, and really get deep into these stories of people who are living around refineries, frontline and fence line communities in the United States, because their stories have yet to be amplified in our world. They've been told locally, but again, the experience you have living next to in St. James Parish, Louisiana, as a Black person, and this massive Formosa plant being, built there, it is going to kill those people. And, we want to amplify that and continue the storytelling work and have it seed campaigns. So it's one part intersectional storytelling, one part strategy develop, one part media, and one part campaigning, coalition building.
I love it. I was sharing in while you were chatting there a little bit, and I'll pull it back up now. But this is a clip of Doshi that he had shared with us previously. Michael Doshi, rocking the Take 3 for the Sea shirt. But this was on your trip, right? And he's standing in front of, for people who are just listening, he's standing in front of this mountain, it seems, of plastic filament and waste left over from cardboard. Right? So this is the leftover, so the residuals, so to speak, right? And this will get sorted through by the waste pickers. And I think what sticks out to me, besides the shocking value of this imagery of the like, oh my goodness, look at this pile of plastic, and knowing that it largely came from, Western countries and was shipped over there. I think the thing that is really powerful, and what I noticed in Doshi when he came back from that trip, was how much he also thought about the people there, because he'd been with you and got to meet Priggy and, so many of the local people who've been working on the issue, and understanding their challenge better, and understand the people who have a job as a result of this waste, and the waste pickers who have a whole economy built around it, and really taking a more systems approach to his thinking of how do we fight this, so to speak. It just speaks to your point around, you take people, you really show them, you create those connections between those two communities that wouldn't normally have it, and then look at what the result is, and it changes the way we think about solutions.
Yeah, and it warms my heart because Doshi and Priggy have become really good friends, and Al Galita is bringing in like programming from Indonesia, from the same stuff that Priggy's organization Ekoton are working on, and let me tell you,
for context, Priggy is a world-renowned environmentalist from Indonesia. Everyone, he has
Golden Prize winner, amazing guy,
truly like next level. Anyway, sorry.
No, and so he's so smart. Like, this guy does the like coolest direct actions you've ever seen, and he travels with 2 lawyers at all times. And when we first met him, because I speak no Bahasa and his English is good, but like not at a metaphorical competence level. And he picked us up from the airport. He's like, come to Surabaya, see our work. And Megan and I were like, okay, this is an interesting story for Story of Plastic, but we didn't know what to expect. And so he picks us up in the car, and we go directly into this direct action where they're going straight out of Compton at the government. And I'm like, wow. And we're like, we
right
don't
off
know.
The plane.
We don't know the legality of this. We don't know if we're because it's before I even knew Priggy, really. And we're starting to be followed by the police in Indonesia, and Priggy is hyper emotionally intelligent, and he looks at both Megan and I, and he's like, you worry the police? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, don't worry, our police are not like your police. And we're like, wow. Like he just like nailed this in so many ways. And then the other favorite Priggy moment was we're filming him doing a direct action a couple of years later, stuff that ended up in the story of Plastic. And CNN Indonesia is filming this because Priggy gets like 20 media people out anytime he does an action. And CNN wanted to interview me making this film. And I was like, that's the guy, that's the guy doing the thing. We're filming him. But they were like, oh, like white guy in Indonesia making movie. He's more interesting than Indonesian guy doing action. So I was like, hold on. I talked to Priggy and I was like, Priggy, this guy wants to interview me. He's like, do it. And he's like, I want you to say these 5 bullet points exactly. And like in a moment, we had this communication where Priggy realizes like we're not going to solve the like global North elitism of that, the post-colonial residue or the systemic racism in that, like in this moment, but we can turn it on its head and have me just be a messenger for his like what his agenda is. And I get interviewed by CNN. Well. And they're like, wow, you really know a lot about Indonesian politics and, how change. And I just started laughing because I was like, so like, that's how great this guy is. Like, he's so smart and he knows how to flip things, on their head in a second. He's got the gift of gab and he's an incredible dude.
And apparently it runs in the family because his whole family, his wife and his daughters are all super activists. And we've reached out to Tara, his daughter, to maybe have her on the show to wrap up our little segment here on Plastic Free July, because we really wanted to hear directly from Priggy or someone over in Indonesia about their experience with all of this. So we're going to be extending this story into another episode, hopefully.
That's awesome. Tara's a force because she's the perfect mixture of Priggy and Priggy's wife Daru. Daru is the voice of reason in the family. And so Priggy's like, let's do this crazy thing. And Daryl's like, well, let's tamp it down a little bit and let's make sure there's strategy and that we get the meeting with the government and all of that. And Tara's like the synchronicity between those things, and it's beautiful.
Love it. All right, man. I want to start wrapping it up just to respect your time. I know you've got 2 brand new little kids at home. Twins, and I know
Ocean and Forest.
I love
2 baby girls.
I love it, man. So you either need to tend to them or go get a nap if you can. If I can free up some of your time. But one sort of final question we always ask, and I'm really curious to hear what you say, both as a surfer but also as an activist. If you could take one person, anyone, with you to go surfing or sailing, whatever you want, who would you take with you? Where would you go and what would you talk about? Anyone in the world?
That's a tough question, but I'm probably going to say Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
RBG.
Yeah. Because I think she'd probably shred it,
Are you surfing or sailing? You're going to take her surfing?
I'm going to take her surfing because
she works out, but I don't know how her pop-up would be.
Yeah, that's true. But, maybe she can sponge it a little bit. But, actually, I think, it's hard for me. Like, surfers to me, pro surfers have a lot of responsibility and ability to, get these issues out there. But I don't necessarily look at them as heroes because they're athletes. But, I would say my favorite surfer that I don't want to surf with because she's too badass for me is Bianca Valente. And I would like
Super
to watch
badass.
I would like to watch her surf Mavericks if that is on my bucket list.
Yeah, I'll watch that from the shore. I'm not paddling out with Mavericks.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to say Bianca is my call.
Okay, but RBG, if you were to take RBG, what would you talk about? This is more of an activism question than it is a surfing question. Most people answer along those lines.
Yeah, I would say is how do we ensure in our future the separation of powers between the judicial, executive, and legislative branch? And what are the things that activists can do to ensure that we have checks and balances moving forward in a time where we're seeing a serious erosion of that. And we're seeing executive power doing things like totally upturning marine protected areas off the East Coast with no fundamental right to do so constitutionally. So I would get pretty deep with her, I would think.
I'm only smiling and kind of chuckling to myself because I'm thinking of it's Sarah Cooper, I believe, the comedian online who's been doing the parodies of our federal administrators, and that she kind of like parodies her voiceovers. And she did one of the lobster discussion in Maine recently when it was announced that they were rolling back the protections. If you haven't seen it, I'll send it to you. I'll link to it in the show notes. It's gold.
Please
anyways,
do.
Stiv, really, it was a pleasure to connect. Anything else you want to share with, we're going to link to Peak Plastic. We're going to link to Story of Plastic. Anything else you want to share with our listeners before we go?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I've been in this game a long time, and I'm finally a father. So now I can start speeches with "as a father," which every father seems to do. But don't get discouraged. Like, we might need to go through this really hard time in the United States to actually grow up as a country. We've had unprecedented prosperity, and we've gotten lazy in our democracy. And I think right now we're learning what's essential and what we want the future to look like for ourselves and our children. So look at this as a moment of reckoning and building rather than a moment of destruction, because we will get through this and we will triumph, and the world's going to be a better place for it.
That's a beautiful outlook, man. I really, really appreciate that, Stiv, and I appreciate all the work that you do, both in front of and behind the camera and behind the scenes to make the world a better place. So thanks, Stiv. I appreciate you taking some time to chat with us.
You too, Reese. Thanks a lot for having me on the show.
You really have to appreciate Stiv's positive outlook. I mean, he's seen some of the worst effects of plastic pollution, and more importantly, of environmental injustice. And yet, he still has this positive outlook. I also love the mental shift from I to we. That's so, so important. I mean, yes, like you, individual listener, you can make change and you can have an impact, but you cannot solve everything yourself. So it's on us to be leaders and be great examples to others, and our collective impact will be even bigger. Finally, I love the work that Stiv and Peak Plastic Foundation are doing for a just recovery. They recently released a series of videos about this, and they're linked in the show notes. So please do go check those out, and check out Peak Plastic, and check out the Story of Plastic. It is really worthwhile to educate yourself on this topic. Okay, that's it for this week, but stick around. At the end, we've got a creative tip from our friend Angela Sun. Thank you, Angela, for sending in a tip. She is a stellar plastic activist as well. And thank you for listening. If you did this podcast, please throw us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Our friend Jules from the Midwest did this week, and it made our day. Thank you, Jules. And generally, we love hearing from you. Email us your tips for going plastic free at oneocean@wslpure.org. Hit us up on social media at WSLPure, and subscribe to our newsletter at wslpure.org. Until next week, I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're staying healthy, staying positive, staying plastic free, and now switching your mindset from I to we. All right, here's a tip from our friend Angela Sun.
Hey everyone, I'm Angela Sun from Plastic Paradise, calling in from Los Angeles, and my best tip for skipping, reducing, cleaning up plastic pollution is just to stop it at the source. Say no, and especially when you go to the grocery store, I know it sounds super simple, but just take your basket or your cart out to your car where you have your reusable bags and fill it up there, and then return the cart or basket. There's no need to take a plastic bag out with you for that short time.
Do you like that? Well, if so, subscribe over there and then watch more videos over there, and then tell us your favorite videos down there. It's a 3-step process. Do them all now.